Imagine putting in the hard work to extend your garage, only to have your HOA claim that you've crossed the line. That's exactly what happened to me. I had spent weeks planning, designing, and building the perfect extension for my garage, only to be hit with a letter saying it was too close to the property line. They demanded I tear it down, and I was furious. But I wasn't about to back down. Instead, I did something that would change the whole game. I turned that line they claimed I crossed into something far more interesting, something that made them rethink their entire approach. I took that line and turned it into a massive 12-foot moat. Sounds crazy, right? But hear me out. Sometimes you have to get creative to fight back against ridiculous rules. What started as a small, frustrating conflict with the HOA quickly spiraled into a full-on battle of wills. The result? Well, let's just say the HOA didn't see this coming. Stick around to find out how I turned my garage extension into the most epic statement against overreaching regulations. Will I win this fight, or will the HOA have the last word? You won't want to miss how this unfolds. So, let me take you back to when this whole thing started. I had been living in my neighborhood for a few years, and everything seemed fine. The houses were nice, the neighbors were friendly, and the HOA, well, they were just a distant presence. You know, the people who send you a reminder to trim your lawn every couple of months. But one day, I got a letter in the mail. The kind of letter you dread seeing. The HOA was claiming that my garage extension had crossed the property line. They said I was in violation of their rules and demanded that I either tear it down or face hefty fines. At first, I thought it was a mistake. After all, I had followed the guidelines, consulted with an architect, and even had the property surveyed. But apparently, that wasn't enough. The HOA insisted that my extension was over the line by a few inches, just enough to make things complicated. I reached out to them, of course. I explained the situation, showed them my plans, even got a second opinion from an expert. But every time I thought we were getting somewhere, they hit me with a new regulation or restriction. It felt like they were just making things harder on purpose. That's when the idea for the moat started brewing in my mind. What if I could turn the tables? What if I could turn this ridiculous situation into something far more memorable? I started by looking into permits, digging into local laws, and speaking with landscapers who had experience with unusual projects. Everyone I spoke to thought it was a crazy idea, but for some reason it only fueled me more. The idea of building something out of spite felt oddly liberating. But the more I planned, the more questions came up. Was I really ready to challenge them this far? And what if it didn't go as planned? What if the HOA escalated things beyond anything I could handle? The closer I got to actually building the moat, the more the weight of it all began to sink in. I had to get this right. The HOA wasn't just some faceless organization. It was made up of people who lived in the same neighborhood, people who could make my life difficult if they really wanted to. What if they took legal action? What if they tried to fine me into submission? The more I thought about it, the more uncertain I became. But there was no going back now. Every conversation, every email, every decision I'd made up until this point had led me to this moment. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. The HOA's rigid rules felt like a chokehold on my ability to improve my own property. It wasn't just about a garage extension anymore. It was about standing up to something that seemed unfair. The more I researched, the more I found stories of other neighbors who'd faced similar issues. One person had to take down an entire deck because it wasn't exactly where the HOA said it should be, even though they'd built it with proper permits. Another neighbor got a fine for a tree they planted a foot too close to the sidewalk. It felt like this HOA had a habit of going after small things that didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And now it was my turn. But I wasn't about to be pushed around. I decided I'd do something that would force the HOA to see just how ridiculous their demands were. That's when the idea for the moat really took shape. A small line wasn't just a boundary anymore, it was a challenge. What if I could transform that boundary into something so bold and undeniable that the HOA would have no choice but to take notice? I'd make the line into something that not only met their approval but outshone their expectations. But I didn't want to go in blind. I needed a plan. I started the groundwork, digging the trench for the moat, setting up barriers to keep it contained. It was more labor than I expected, and every time I looked at the mound of dirt piling up in my yard, it felt like I was digging myself deeper into a situation I couldn't escape from. The neighbors started noticing, of course. Some of them thought I'd finally lost it, while others seemed oddly supportive. There was an almost eerie excitement in the air, like everyone knew something big was coming, but no one knew exactly how it would play out. Then, the HOA showed up. A couple of days into the project, I saw one of the board members walking past my yard, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowing at the trench I'd started. I had expected this. It was only a matter of time before they caught wind of it, but when I saw that look in his eyes, something in me snapped. This was no longer just a battle over property lines. It was about principle. This wasn't just my garage or my yard. It was my home, my right to do what I saw fit with it. And I was ready to fight back, consequences be damned. But now, with the HOA watching, I knew the real battle was about to begin. As the HOA member walked away, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I'd expected them to be upset, but the cold stare he gave me sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know what he would do next, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. I tried to keep my focus, but something was off. The air was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Maybe I had underestimated how far they were willing to go to shut me down. That evening, I received another letter. This one was different from the usual polite warnings. It was from a lawyer, threatening legal action. They claimed that my actions were not only violating HOA rules, but also posed a serious risk to the neighborhood. According to them, the moat could cause water drainage problems, potentially flooding the neighboring homes. They warned me to stop construction immediately or face a lawsuit that could cost me thousands. I couldn't believe it. A simple garage extension had turned into an all-out war. But then something even more shocking happened. The very next day, one of my neighbors, a guy I barely knew, came over to my door. He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure if he should be talking to me at all. He told me he'd overheard some of the HOA board members planning to use my case as an example for future property disputes. They were going to turn me into a public case, make it a spectacle. It wasn't just about my garage anymore. It was about sending a message to everyone in the neighborhood. I was stunned. The stakes had just been raised in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't just fighting for my property now, I was fighting for my reputation. The HOA was determined to make an example out of me, and that meant things were about to get a lot uglier. The next few days felt like a blur. I knew I had to act fast, but the pressure was unbearable. I couldn't just roll over and let the HOA crush me, especially now that they were going after my reputation. But it wasn't just about defending my property anymore. It was about standing up to an organization that thought they could control every little aspect of our lives. I decided it was time to escalate things on my terms. I wasn't going to let them make me the scapegoat for their overreach. I called a meeting with every neighbor I knew who had been through similar battles with the HOA. We met in my backyard, just across from the moat, and I shared my plan. It was bold, risky, but if I could pull it off, it might be the end of the HOA's reign of fear. We gathered evidence, show how their power had been abused, and expose how petty their rules really were. We needed to show the community that standing up to the HOA wasn't just possible, it was necessary. As I prepared for what I hoped would be the final confrontation, the HOA sent one last letter, demanding I tear down the moat and restore the property to its original state or face a massive lawsuit. I was ready. My lawyer had everything we needed, and the support from my neighbors had given me a sense of power I hadn't felt before. Then, just as I was about to take my stand, the final twist came. The very same HOA board member who had been watching my yard showed up at my door. He wasn't there to threaten me. Instead, he handed me a piece of paper, an official request to meet with the board to discuss a compromise. It was almost too good to be true. I walked into that meeting with everything prepared, ready for a fight. But what I didn't expect was the board's shocking admission. They had been overstepping their bounds for years, and the community had finally had enough. In a stunning turn of events, they were offering to rewrite many of the outdated and unfair rules. The very thing they'd been punishing us for was about to be overhauled. As I walked out of that meeting, victorious, a strange feeling washed over me. The battle wasn't just won for me, it was won for the entire neighborhood. But as I looked back at my garage, at the 12-foot moat still standing proudly, I couldn't help but wonder if, in the end, it had been the moat that had changed everything. It wasn't just a defiant statement, it had become the symbol of a fight that, in the most unexpected way, had forced change. As I stood there, taking in everything that had happened, it felt surreal. The battle with the HOA, the stress, the tension, it was all finally over. The moat, which had started as a symbol of defiance, was now something completely different. It had become the catalyst for a much-needed change. The community was buzzing with excitement, and the board's agreement to revise their rules meant that no one would have to live under the same oppressive restrictions again. What started as a personal fight had turned into a collective victory for everyone who'd ever been stifled by the HOA's control. Looking back, I realized that the true victory wasn't in the outcome of the legal battle or the changes in the neighborhood's rules. It was in the unity that came from standing up for what's right. When you fight for what you believe in, when you refuse to be silenced, it can inspire others to do the same. The neighbors who had supported me felt empowered, and I could see how their own confidence had grown as a result. As for the HOA, they backed down, and life returned to normal, but it was a new normal. I kept the moat, and while it didn't serve its original purpose, it stood as a reminder. Sometimes, the smallest acts of rebellion can lead to the biggest changes. I may have started this fight alone, but I didn't end it that way. We all